So, here we are, but before we proceed I have to ask, do you really want to do this? We followed through with your request, Mr. Sinan, but you have to be aware that no matter what you'll see behind this door, it will not be what you're looking for. I will be the judge of that. Let's go. As you wish. Here she is. Good afternoon, Professor. Good afternoon, Mr. Oh dear, I do not believe we were introduced. By the stars, Elena. She looks just like she did when I first met her. How did you... Your granddaughter gave us enough videos and photos, and with that data we were able to reconstruct your wife's face from her wedding day. She's so real, and yet you were right. She looks at me, but her eyes are empty. It is not the same. Apologies, Mr. Sinan. She may look like your late wife, and she may be built out of her genetic material, but she is still her own being, and she sees you for the first time in her life. But could I somehow teach her to become like Elena? Most probably no. Sadly, replicating human body is far easier than replicating mind and character. Your wife, and any other person for that matter, became the woman she was thanks to all experiences she had in her life. You might try to tell her about Elena and teach her to act like her, and I'm sure your affection would help her adjust, but in the end she would still be a different person, merely impersonating real Elena Sinan. Plus, you would have to deal with a great many technical issues. For one, she doesn't have a long life ahead of her. In the current state of our technology, she looks at 10, maybe 15 years at most, and you would still have to spend 2 or 3 of them to teach her how to act like a real person. She may look like an adult woman, but mentally she's practically a newborn child. I see. Thank you for showing me, Professor Tanwa, but I think I won't be taking her with me. I hope you understand. I do. You're not the only one who grasped at untested ideas to bring back someone dear to you. Very well then. I can at least hope Elena's clone will be useful to the rest of the Commonwealth. Let's just go. Thank you. Take your time, Mr. Sinan. I'm alright. So tell me, what other applications this tech will have? It can't be just to bring back flawed copies of dead family members. Actually, once we perfect the technique, I'm positive that cloning will become an everyday part of our lives. For one, there is an obvious military application. With a proper template, we will be able to create armies of soldiers at peak physical performance. Other than that, the medicine will surely benefit from this. Imagine, say, a patient with some unknown disease, one that we cannot cure. We could clone the patient, hibernate them to hold the progress of their disease, and try to find cure using clones. Admirable goals, Professor. Admirable, but not exactly ethical. Experiments are one thing, but creating actual human beings to act as lab rats doesn't sound right. That depends on what we consider to be a human. As I mentioned, a clone may look like a grown person, but upon their creation they're like infants, blank slates without anything that makes them an actual person. No personality, no experiences, not even thoughts for first few days. But I'll admit that there will be quite a lot of people who will not see it the way I do. But thankfully cloning will have a ton of uses without replicating actual living beings. Cloning organs is the best example. With a proper infrastructure, it could become an industrialized process in which organs could be grown and distributed across the population as soon as they are needed. No longer would a transplant patient have to wait for a proper donor. Instead, if he needs, say, a new liver, it would be delivered within an hour. Hell, with our current pace of progress, we could even grow new and better organs with each passing year, and every decade our citizens could go to the clinic and retrofit themselves with newest, more efficient innards. And that would make the entire society healthier, happier and more efficient, which means profit for everyone involved. Very well, Professor Tanwa, you convinced me. This department will have my funding as well, but I have one condition. Leave the marketing to my people. You researchers are the future of our nation, there's no doubt about it, but if you'll start talking about this tech, you're going to cause a panic. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Second Chance. Last time, we left Commonwealth at the dawn of war against the Billion Mind, a race of blue and brown-skinned humanoids whose minds are linked together into a single race-wide consciousness. In recent years, the Mind fought a war against another nation, our rivals from Kingdom of Yadra, and were victorious, gaining control over Yadran homeworld and another one of their colonies. And that conquest was so brutal that it forced some of the Yadrans to actually abandon hate and fear of us that their monarchy instilled in abandon them and flee towards our space, where, in recent months, over 1 billion refugees arrived, and they very quickly realized that if they have to take a chance with either us or Billy ones, then we are a far better alternative. Because there is no reasoning with the mind, its very thoughts are incomprehensible to us, and it only seems to have one goal: expand and consume everything in its path, in order to fuel that expansion even further. So, once we learn about the sheer scale of genocide that is currently happening on conquered Yadran worlds, our government decided, officially at least, that we simply cannot stand idly by while an entire planet gets slaughtered, and we declared a war of liberation. Except it's not exactly a full liberation. We will free the Yadrans of both races from the Billy One swarms, but we won't give the worlds back to the monarchy, for several reasons. First one is of course the fact that Kingdom has proved too weak to protect itself, and second, more pragmatic one, is that Yadran monarchy is our rival, who repeatedly denounced us in recent years, and by taking over their former capital, we hope to build support among the population to either help us restore our relations to something more cordial, or, if diplomacy fails, to cause divide within their society that will keep them busy with internal strife and keep the kingdom off our backs. But before we can do any of this, we actually have to win the war, which may prove to be a challenge since Billy One Mind is the most powerful entity in our sector, a fact that they have recently proved by scoring an overwhelming victory against a Hadi conglomerate in the north. Fortunately though, our fleet has seen some upgrades since the last time it had to fight, and thanks to our industrial potential, we're even able to secure some very preferential trade deals with other nations, deals that will help us increase the size of our armed forces even further, because, as we have learned in our war against the Zrakan, superior weapons and equipment may be important, but sheer numerical advantage is still something that wins the majority of the war. So, we shall build as many ships as we can, and hope that it will be enough to see this war through. Now, since our fleet has quite a long journey ahead of it, we're going to have some time to take a look at our civil endeavors, namely recent terraforming developments on the surface of Redamon Prime. As you may remember, one of the major landmarks on this planet, aside from the pyramid of course, is a rather massive volcano located on the southern hemisphere. It's quite unstable, and while its frequent eruptions supply us with surprising amounts of energy, it was decided that it is simply too dangerous to let that volcano just stay there and explode every now and then. And here is where our technological prowess can truly shine, because, thanks to our advances in the fields of tectonics and geology, our delvers and shapers are able to redirect the lava flow into a remote location without causing any disruptions to ecosystem, effectively removing the volcano, freeing up tons of space that we can now use to develop our infrastructure. And the best thing is that this seemingly impossible project will take just 2 months to accomplish. If that's not the proof of our mastery over nature, then I don't know what is. And, perhaps more importantly, removal of that volcano will make the planet safer, since random clouds of ash won't randomly obstruct orbital flight anymore, and because of that, people of Redamon Prime will now be able to fully focus on expansion, and, as you've seen back there, the Council has designated the planet to become our cultural center. On the surface, it's all rather obvious. After all, the Asian Pyramid complex is basically a gigantic museum the size of a small country, but there is also another goal leaders of the Commonwealth had in mind. By making Redamon Prime our culture world, it will now surely see an increase in the number of tourists who, when exposed to the pyramid, may unlock their innate psionic potential. So, essentially, it is a massive planet-wide experiment, but one that will pay off almost from the day one. Let's just hope it won't backfire. Soon though, our fleet has finally entered Yadrani orbit and begun bombarding Billy One drones that swarmed the surface of the planet. Unfortunately though, it was not like bombarding Zrakan forces. Our flowery enemies were organized and operated in a way similar to our own military, but Billy Ones don't care about army organization. Their drones just roam the planet from one feasting ground to the other, so they present far more difficult targets. Plus, we were unable to make any contact with Yadrans on the surface. They are either unable or unwilling to talk to us, and call targets like Aramathi did. And that means that, no matter how good we aim, some of our barrages will inevitably fall on Yadran civilians. Shame, but there's nothing we can do about it, so we'll just have to continue. And in the meantime, back at home, our land forces, the ones who will have to deal with Billy Ones on the ground, have just finished their reorganization. and thanks to that we now have a second army that will act as a spearhead of our invasion. In short, General Branitzky has formed a mechanized assault squadron, an army of 2 million battle droids, 100,000 combat mechs, and a surprise. From the windswept valleys and mountains of Minerva comes the army of 500,000 of bear-sized tamed arachnids and about 10,000 handlers from the Bioshock division. Now, this army is as experimental as they get, and using them against civilized enemies would probably be considered a war crime, but since Billy-1 drones are practically mindless, we can use this army without much issue. Still, it would be wise to keep those spiders on a short leash to keep them from hunting Yadrons as well, as it surely won't help our reputation. Still though, it is yet another proof of our mastery over nature. Decades ago, these spiders picked off our terrified explorers, and today they act as ravenous swarm of their own. But while this army of robots, mechs and nightmarish spiders will go in first, our regular forces, the 12 million troopers from all across our worlds, will also have a job in this war. And, as you can see, they also have a new commander, Telavin Uvimava, a Kithri veteran of Battle of New Sajar. Back then, they proved themselves to be an extremely flexible officer, able to adapt on the fly and respond to unexpected situations without missing a beat. And, because of that, they were promoted to the rank of Army General, same one as Branitzky has, although, for the purposes of this war at least, Telavin is going to act as Branitzky's subordinate, since the military council decided that having two commanders of the same rank on the field could lead to chaos and conflicting orders. But the very act of this nomination is yet another proof of just how well the Kithri have adapted to their new reality. One of them is already in the Science Council, and another one just became our highest military officer, and to think they weren't even sentient when we first met them. Now, with our land forces in transit, we can take a look at yet another recent acquisition, a freshly founded colony of Nomotar Prime, located in Nomotar system that lies at the very edge of the galaxy. And this world is the most alien one compared to the ones we've settled so far. For one, its star is an extremely rare black dwarf, and second, up till now, we mostly limited our expansion to either cold or arid worlds, but Nomotar Prime is neither of those. In fact, it is an atoll world, a planet covered almost completely in warm oceans with archipelagos of tropical islands dotting its surface. So, because this planet is too inhospitable to our own people, even the Kithri, we had to use yet another alien race to settle it, and this time the honor went to Kithri lookalikes, the Utkavongo, who are quickly becoming one of the more important groups in our society. Over the recent years we've actually seen a ton of immigration from Utkavongo, but the thing is that this immigration is pretty much one-sided. They come to us, but we don't go to them, and the reason for that state of affairs is, unfortunately, very pragmatic one. The Utkavongo are afraid, for they are yet another race of pacifists who don't really fit in the warlike north, dominated by Billion mind and several imperialistic hegemonies that constantly look for any sign of weakness in their neighbors. And that caused many of the Utkavongo citizens, over 5 billion up to this point, to pack up and leave before their nation is invaded. Now, in theory we're sworn to protect each other because of our defensive pact, but our allies are not stupid. They know that we can't reach them, so in case of war they would be on their own. And so, their people slowly but surely migrate towards the safety of Commonwealth fortresses, where they hope to live a bit safer life than back at home. And, thanks to their natural adaptability, which is almost a complete opposite of ours, they will have a chance to do just that. With the help of our government, they may one day turn Nomotar into the sanctuary they're looking for. But while Utkavongo are busy with colonization efforts, back home we have to contend with yet another political party, and this one was actually formed as the effect of our recent conflicts. This Military Officers Association is led by none other than our Prime Minister, Takumi Ishii, who formed it in order to keep the more opportunistic elements of our military, like General Branitzky, in one place. But the very act of forming this party made our government realize just how many people support these militarists, as the association quickly gathered around 3 billion supporters among our population, the vast majority of them on Curaçao. Now, it remains to be seen whether creation of this party is a good or bad thing, but one thing we can tell for sure: it becomes increasingly difficult to keep an eye on all of these political powers in the council. The Innovation Party will have to get it together, or they will risk disappearing from the political scene. We'll focus back on our invasion now, because our government has received very disturbing news from Task Force Manticore. Our fleet finally managed to gather enough data from the surface of the planet, and what they broadcasted back home made our military realize that we may actually have a time limit in this war. The conditions on the surface of Yadrani are horrible. There are over 2 billion Billions swarming the planet, exterminating any group of Yadrans they come across. But while the process of depopulating an entire world is not a quick one, our prediction programs leave nothing to the imagination. If we won't break Billion forces by the end of April 2249, it may be that there won't be enough Yadrans on the planet to repopulate. Between rampaging hordes and rampant starvation and disease, the Yadrans will simply vanish, and that will of course mean the complete failure of our mission. So, now we have to get a move on unless we want to gain control over a massive silent graveyard, and as you can see, our mechanized spearhead has just arrived at its target and is currently on its way to the surface. Thousands of shuttles tear through atmosphere into a scarred world below them, where massive columns of smoke mark locations turned into dust by our fleet. And yet, as they approach the landing site, the sensors pick up more and more movement. The Billion hordes are moving to intercept. Interestingly though, it seems that as his own shuttle was on its way to the surface, General Branitzky decided to actually make a proclamation, in which he and his general's staff outlined a creation of yet another political party, the One Throne Group, and, conveniently, the ideals of this party seem to be surprisingly in line with ideals of Kingdom of Yadra, so perhaps our general decided to use this party as a sort of propaganda machine in order to gain some support from local population. At least that's what we hope, because these ideals are pretty much against everything Commonwealth stands for. We are a democratic nation, so stratifying our society into a caste system and forming a monarchy is obviously out of the question. To be honest, this proclamation caught both government and military completely by surprise, but we can't really do anything about it right now. We can just hope that Branitzky really wants to use it as a propaganda machine. Any other alternative would mean that we should probably remove him from his post as soon as possible. Not that we can do it now though, as his forces have just landed on the surface of Yadrani and began the invasion. And it quickly became obvious that Branitzky had a good idea when he only took robots and spiders with him, because it managed to completely confuse Billion swarms. In short, they very quickly realized that steel mechs and robots are very difficult to eat, and the only organic enemy, the Minervan spiders, can actually match them when it comes to sheer brutality and ferocity. Within just a few days, most of the battle swarms have been pushed back, and the rest of our infantry could land safely and join Branitzky's forces in their final push. But while Televin's troops expected a walk in the park, the truth proved to be a bit less cheerful. By the time our infantry landed, Billions managed to regroup, as the mind adapted to us using robots, and soon our battle droid formation started taking serious losses. And, to make matters worse, it also turned out that the main assumption that we started this war on turned out to be wrong, as suddenly sensors of Task Force Manticore picked up a massive energy signature that signaled the arrival of Billion fleet, and as you can clearly see, it is not the enemy that we can take on, no matter how good our ships may be right now. Fortunately though, there are some good news. One, Billion ships use warp drives, which means that, after arriving into the system, they have to spend up to several weeks in a stationary formation in order to vent their drive cores. And two, our land forces managed to eliminate enemy combat swarms on the surface of Yadrani, taking out over 10 million drones, while losing less than 20,000 soldiers and about 700,000 battle droids. There are still billions of regular drones on the planet, and they are just as ferocious as combat ones, but we really don't have time to deal with them right now. As soon as last pocket of Billion resistance fell, our troops immediately boarded their shuttles and returned to orbit. We've won a first battle, now it was time for a tactical retreat. The Yadrans are once again on their own. But despite that unexpected development, the situation isn't exactly as bad as you might expect. For one, it seems that Billion fleet is more interested in engaging our own navy rather than retaking the planet. They just unloaded their armies and followed Manticore to the neighboring system. And that means that they are not bombarding Yadrani, which gives forces that are there a chance to survive, because there actually are some forces there. When we retreated, our troops left a ton of supplies and equipment on the surface, and several million Yadrans, now free from most dangerous enemies, were able to organize themselves into militia units. They even managed to rebuild some of the fortifications, which, as we have learned before, are extremely useful against planetary invasions. And without enemy fleet to destroy these defenses from orbit, the Yadrans now have a fighting chance. Obviously, against an enemy so numerous and aggressive they can only delay the inevitable, but each day of that delay gives our forces a chance to find a weak spot in Billy 1 defenses, and perhaps most importantly, it also gives our industry a chance to build more ships, because we solely need them to tip the balance in our favor. However, this sudden appearance and subsequent departure of enemy fleet made us realize just what kind of strategy the mind is trying to pursue in this war. The Billy 1 consciousness seemed to understand two things: that entering our territory is a suicide because of our powerful defenses, and that Manticore is our most important asset in this war, which is why they're trying their best to intercept it, even if it means leaving their invasion force on its own. But because of that warp cooldown they have to endure after every jump, we can just outmaneuver them. Manticore can use a wormhole generator to get to Bardagan system, where Katanab is, and as soon as Billy 1 fleet shows up, we can simply disengage back to Marinius, before they can even move away from their jump point. And that's the second thing we learn about our enemy. While it is good at prioritizing targets, it also appears to have some issues when it comes to memory, because as soon as our fleet jumps away, the swarm will immediately set course to bombard Yadrani, which is their second priority target. And that gives us an opportunity to once again play the game of cat and mouse, jump into Badragan, bait enemy fleet, and retreat to Marinius as soon as they show up. If we play this right, we may completely prevent the mind from bombing Yadrani. Now, an intelligent enemy would surely realize this strategy and set a trap for us at a jump point, but the mind doesn't seem to be able to figure it out, which will even the odds a bit. And that gives us another opportunity. When the enemy fleet is away, we can send our ground forces to land on Yadran homeworld once again, and help them deal with the invaders. And that was exactly what General Branitsky planned, but just a few weeks before landing on the planet, he made a correction to his plan, claiming that he's not going to send his men into a potentially suicide mission, since Billy 1 fleet can always abandon their pursuit and focus their attention on our land forces. Branitsky decided to only take his mechanized command with him, mechs, droids and spiders, while General Telavin will take our original 12 armies, retreat back to Marinius, and remain there on standby, waiting for an opportunity to strike at Katanab, since it is, at least according to our preliminary scans, almost undefended. And while Branitsky and his specialists prepared themselves for yet another landing, back home a small group of the brightest minds of the Bioshock division, with Professor Tanwar at the helm, began working on a project that, in the coming decades, may become the turning point for humanity and other races of the Commonwealth. We already claim the mastery over nature, but if this project proves successful, we'll be able to take control over our own evolution and build humanity into something greater. Yes, hello, this is Chancellor Teza speaking. Good afternoon, Oh, sorry, Chancellor, I didn't mean to wake you up. And I didn't mean to fall asleep, especially not at the desk in my office, so thanks for bringing me back to the land of the living. But if you don't mind me saying, you too look like you haven't had a decent night's sleep in months. Looks like this war is kicking the crap out of all of us. That bad? Well, we have permanent full complement of politicians here on the station, and Sinon and his cronies don't leave council chambers even at night, constantly trying to find more and more resources to throw into this war. If not for them, we'd stand no chance of keeping our forces operational for all this time, but even with their help it seems like we're looking at another economic crisis. And don't even get me started on messages I get from Branitsky and his forces. It's a wonder I can sleep at all after reading them, and they only get worse. Oh, well then I won't bother you further. No, please, tell me what's in your mind. I can tell you right now, it's not about the war. Even better, I could use a distraction. Very well then. You know that microbe that lives inside each and every human? You know, the one that extends our lifespan by about 2 decades. Sorry, stupid question, of course you do. Anyway, I've spent past few years researching it on the side, and now with the ability to clone human bodies, I had a chance to delve deeper and gain more insight into the way it works. And I found out that, basically, we owe that tiny creature more credit than it gets. For all I can tell, our entire race owes it its very existence. Okay, now that's a bit dramatic. Care to elaborate? Aye, but before I begin, can you tell me the temperature in your office? Same as always, 6 degrees Celsius. Exactly, and yet you sit there with your sleeves rolled up and you're not cold, something our ancestors from Earth would find near impossible. So anyway, I've been comparing my newest findings with historical data from after the Exodus, and it looks like we don't just owe our longer lifespan to this microbe, but also our ability to survive in conditions that Earth humans would find very hostile. After all, the average temperature on Ortus is around -20 Celsius, way lower than on our former homeworld. But the thing is that if you read into the records from after the Exodus, you you can notice that, while many deaths still happened for the first 2 or so decades, the number of frost-related ones drops almost to 0 after first year, which is precisely the time the microbe needs to form a symbiotic link with its human host. Now, of course, we knew this thing was beneficial, thanks to this protective layer it creates around our cells, but before we had no idea just how useful this symbiosis actually is. And now, with data gathered from several dozen clones, I can tell for sure that it is thanks to that tiny little guy that we were able to survive on this frozen planet at all. Now, don't give me that look, because now it's time for the good part. You know how our people are almost completely useless when it comes to settling worlds different than our own? Well, for years we thought that it is the lack of biosphere on Ortus that caused our natural resilience to recede. But the truth is that once again the culprit is our resident microbe. It is very unadaptable on its own, and so it discreetly modifies its host to ensure that it stays within acceptable biome, going so far as to reducing our natural resistance. And now for the kicker. With recent inventions in the field of genetic tailoring, and thanks to my clones, I was able to pinpoint the exact strand that is responsible for this microbe's poor survivability, and with a bit of time I can fix it, leaving all the beneficial effects while removing our lack of adaptability. Wow, that's actually awesome. It would allow us to actually settle our own colonies instead of constantly relying on robots and other races. It would allow us to settle planets within our borders that, up to now, were out of our reach. It's probably the biggest news for humanity since we found first intelligent alien life. Could you reverse longer pregnancies back to being 9-month affairs as well? Well, no. I mean, perhaps I could, but it would be far more complicated since, as I mentioned, the microbe needs almost a year to fully develop within its host. Perhaps in the future, but now I'd really like to focus on that adaptability, and let me just warn you, it won't be a quick and easy business. Basically, if my data is correct, each and every one of our citizens would require at least a month-long genetic treatment for all the changes to successfully take place. And, as you might expect, it may take a while given how many people will have to rewrite. I see. In that case, it would be better if you waited with this project until the end of the war. It will be good for us, and it will surely gather a lot of support, but for now we have to focus on actually winning this mess. Of course, I'll be honest with you, I miss those times when we were explorers, not soldiers. So do I. But think about it. Think what would happen to us if we had stayed on Ortus, or if we ignored all these conflicts. Think of the enslaved Aramathi, think of the devoured Yadrans. If nothing else, we are the lesser evil. Might as well get used to it. And speaking of mastery over nature, we have just finished another one of our terraforming projects. You may remember the planet Deus Ex 3, a hot, humid world covered in oceans and mangrove jungles. Over the last few years, our Shaper teams worked around the clock to remove most of the water from the planet, mostly by greatly increasing evaporation rate. Once the majority of salt water was gone, the mangroves soon followed, and what was left was a salty desert. And because said desert had high amount of salt, it was very bright, a fact that allowed it to reflect far more sunlight, effectively lowering the temperature. We also added certain chemical compounds into the atmosphere that not only illuminated the sky with a light show during every sunset and sunrise, they also made it even more reflective, and in the end we got a world with average temperature of about 12 degrees Celsius. Still a bit too much for our cold-liking citizens, but certainly far better than a hot, wet jungle. And to top it all off, we even managed to adapt local algae to these new conditions, which means we'll be able to use them to boost our farming efforts once we settle this world. So, our technological prowess once again turned an inhospitable world into a potential colony, and although we won't be able to settle it just yet, since all our nation is in full war economy mode, as soon as the war is over, we'll be able to send our settlers, human settlers finally, and bring this planet into the Commonwealth, and turn it into our breadbasket. So, between our mechs, robots and spiders fighting Billy ones on Yadrani, and our fleet acting like a live bait, we've managed to win ourselves a bit of time, something that we desperately need, since we have to increase the strength of our navy if we want to stand a chance. And while our shipyards keep building new warships, we receive some additional good news. Despite the destruction of one of their fleets, the Alir-Sandrithan Federation managed to ultimately win their war against Yanari League, by attacking them across a wide front and occupying some of their planets, while staying away from their navy. And while they had to sacrifice some of their own troops, like their fleet in the last episode, the end result was worth it. The leaders of Yanari League were forced to dismantle one of their frontier stations, their prestige in the eyes of their people took a severe hit, and, crucially, they were forced to outlaw slavery, at least for the duration of the truce. And that is not only a severe hit to Yannari economy, but also to their very way of life, since upper classes of their society tend to be rather decadent, and for the past few centuries they always relied on the slaves to do menial work. Sadly though, while slavery has been banned, the caste system is still in place, which means that despite being technically free people, the lowest castes of Yannari society are still almost completely stuck in worse jobs. Only difference is that now they can move from place to place and choose their own workplace. Thing is, one mine or one field may not exactly be that much different than any other, so there's a good chance that, despite this being a moral victory, this peace deal will bring no lasting effects to Yannari society. Time will tell, but our xenologists don't seem overly optimistic. Back in the north, however, the war continued without any dramatic changes, and although we managed to push Billion combat swarms from Yadran capital once again, the progress of our campaign was not sufficient. Day after day, our people received more disturbing reports from the surface of occupied worlds. On Yadrani, tensions rose between Yadran militias and our forces, which disrupted our efforts to eliminate the rest of unarmed Billion drones. And on Katanab, the swarms picked up the pace, and with each passing day millions of Yadran people fell to their relentless advance. And still we had no means of breaking Billion fleet, despite most of our scientific and industrial efforts being focused on improving our navy. New shield generators were installed on our vessels, new weapons were drafted and tested, and every bit of resources was funneled into our shipyards, but still it was not enough. Soon it was clear that if we want to win this war in time, we'll have to do something questionable, and we once again approached various galactic civilizations, the unreliable ones this time, to sell our technology in exchange for resources. First we approached the Covenant, since some of its people lived on our worlds, but while they wanted to lay their appendages on our technologies, they were less than willing to actually pay for them, so we struck no deal. Then we approached the Batter Rexicodians, and although their stratified society of mindless slaves and decadent masters is not something we approve, we managed to work out a mutually beneficent deal. Next, the Cyrillan Union was just as willing to trade as the Covenant, and they even claimed that they do not want to poison their souls with our inhumane wisdom. But the democratic god of Fenhalor looked kindly on our proposition, and soon convoys from the Concordat began moving towards our borders, carrying materials needed for new warships. But that was it. All other races simply ignored our communication efforts, so we'll have to make do with what we have. It may not be enough, not yet anyway, but every little bit helps. Fortunately though, it seems we still haven't finished meeting all our potential trading partners, as we once again received a message from our diplomats and explorers in the west. This time they encountered an Awa realm, another caste-based society led by a single figure. In a way, this nation was very similar to Miravandians to our south, even more so considering that they were both very odd-looking plantoids. Fortunately though, these Awa were just as peaceful as Miravandians, so we quickly managed to establish decent relations with them, and it also made us realize that, for some reason, all evolved plant life in this galaxy seems to have an affinity towards autocracy. Miravandians in the south, Zrakan in the east, Fafsim to the north, and now this realm in the west. All these societies, despite being light years apart, seem to favor authoritarianism. Perhaps it is just a coincidence, perhaps it is not, but no matter the reason, it is an interesting fact that races that share their biological composition also seem to share the same approach towards life and leadership. If we were not at war, our xenologist would surely love to spend some time trying to uncover the underlying reason, if there is any. We kept building up our forces almost until the end of year 2247, and finally in November we were ready to break the pattern of our baiting moves and prepared to engage Billion fleet. Admiral Lin and her officers spent many days trying to form a plan for this battle, but the truth was that we were facing an enemy that was so uninterested in self-preservation that it was simply impossible to predict what they may do. In the end, all plans were scrapped and an adaptive strategy was approved. In short, the idea is to engage enemy fleet, never stop, keep firing, and look for any possible opening or attack of opportunity against exposed targets. So, not much of a plan, truth be told, especially against an enemy of equal power, and our captains weren't exactly too eager when they entered Wormhole to Mazaka system, but once they arrived, they immediately noticed something that made their heads spin. The power signature of the Billy 1 fleet that our sensors constantly picked up was all of a sudden way smaller than just a few days ago. Completely bewildered by this, Admiral Lin ordered her engineers to double then triple check the data, just in case it was a malfunction or a trap, but the results remained the same. For some unknown reason, the entire Billy 1 fleet operated at 50% capacity. Their shields, their engines, their weapons all appeared weakened to our sensors. The decision was made in an instant. No matter the reason, we now had the opportunity we were waiting for. At any time, enemy fleet may power its systems back again, so we have to move. And so, Admiral Lin ordered her entire formation to move at top speed. No matter what, we cannot waste this chance. But as we approached the planet, we picked up even more weird news. It seems that energy situation is so bad in the Billy 1 fleet that the Mind decided to cannibalize its corvettes in order to transfer their reactors to other ships. Without us ever firing a shot, 13 enemy corvettes were removed from the upcoming battle, lowering enemy strength even more. And breaking character once again, let me just tell you that this is pure luck with zero skill on my part. In all my playthroughs in Stellaris, I have seen AI running out of energy only maybe 2 or 3 times, and even then only for a few days. That this happened in this game is just pure luck. That it happened in this game and in such critical moments probably means that I should light a candle and make a reasonably high donation to the Church of RN Jesus. Now we have to wait and see just what the galaxy will do to restore the balance. And it seems that transferring power from corvettes to the rest of ships worked well for the Mind, because by the time Manticore finally arrived, enemy vessels were once again fully powered and ready to fight. But fully powered doesn't mean fully operational. While their weapons may be back up to 100% capacity, our enemies had no chance to fully recharge their shields, which, paired with loss of their corvettes, means that we still have an advantage, though not as decisive as we had just a few days ago. Still, it was now or never. Taking out this fleet probably won't be enough to end this war right now, so we still have to wipe out the defenses of Katanab and land our forces there in order to secure our victory, and, as we know, we're quickly running out of time. So, from the bridge of CSV Osiris, Admiral Lin ordered all her ships to engage the enemy, and this time, as you can clearly see, we are not making a mistake of standing still. Our warships split into 2 groups in order to distract enemy formation and use superior range of our weapons, especially missiles, to keep distance and ensure that at least some part of our fleet can engage the enemy without risk of return fire. But the engagement still wasn't easy. The Billy 1 fleet may be smaller than ours, but they have an advantage when it comes to larger ships. They have 3 battle cruisers to our 2 and 13 regular cruisers to our 6, but as we have learned in the past, while cruisers may be powerful, their large weapons aren't exactly that good when it comes to dealing with smaller ships, like corvettes and to lesser extent destroyers. And since destroyers form the main bulk of our fleet, we can use their superior agility to dodge some of the enemy attacks. However, this battle uncovered yet another issue. While the core of unorthodox engineering, the psionic technicians who operate our experimental engines, did their best, it quickly became obvious that, when compared to plasma thrusters used by the Mind, and earlier by the Zraken, our engines are simply not effective enough. Yes, they may slightly improve the efficiency of our shields, but when you face a broadside from a battle cruiser, it's better to just try to dodge it instead of hoping that our shields will hold. And unfortunately, whenever enemy vessels managed to score a hit, it was almost impossible for our smaller ships to survive it, and soon wrecks of corvettes and destroyers began floating through space, torn apart by a barrage of kinetic projectiles. But for every ship that we lost, another one was saved by the efforts of engineers from CSV Mithril, our support cruiser. Ignoring the absolute firestorm on the battlefield, their swift repair shuttles and automated drones zipped all around our formation, fixing hull breaches, venting weapon overloads, and, if all else failed, picking up escape pods from destroyed ships. And while it's obvious that their contribution wasn't decisive in this battle, it still managed to save hundreds of lives out there, and made us realize the value these ships have. And again, it shows just how lucky we were, because Billy 1 fleet also had 2 of these support cruisers, but like with corvettes, they were forced to dismantle their reactors as well, probably transferring them to battle cruisers. So, if not for that sudden energy failure, our enemies would have means to fix their own ships during battle, which would surely prolong it, causing more casualties on our side. But luckily, that is not the case here, and soon Task Force Manticore reported a decisive victory over Billy 1 combat swarm. Not a complete victory though, because as soon as Mind realized that it has no chance of winning this combat, its fleet simply jumped away, risking critical damage in an emergency jump, rather than losing their entire force to our attacks. Finally, on 12th of May 2248, our HQ at Merit Citadel picked up a following message. Battle over Yadrani was won with minor losses. 11 corvettes and 4 destroyers. Casualties, around 1,000 crewmen lost, another 1,000 wounded. Enemy losses, all 13 destroyers, 4 cruisers and 1 battlecruiser. Casualties unknown. We have no idea how many drones operate on each ship, and they do not seem to be using escape pods. But the second part of the report was far more important. Despite our losses, our remaining vessels were in a good shape, thanks to hard work of CSV Mithril. And as soon as Admiral Lin gathered all her survivors, she immediately decided to proceed with second part of our plan, invasion of Katanab. The planet itself was poorly defended, but there was still a spaceport there that Billy once taken from Yadra after the war. And this spaceport could wipe out our entire invasion force, but as you can see, General Televin's army is escorted by Task Force Manticore, and against its firepower this commandeered station stands no chance whatsoever, and soon is blown to pieces by massed barrage. Once that's over with, Manticore proceeded with parking above the planet and commencing orbital bombardment, and within a few weeks they managed to reduce Billy 1 defenses enough for Televin's army to safely land and proceed with operation. The first wave landed on the surface of Katanab on 28th of October 2248, and after 3 weeks of fierce combat, they managed to eliminate last of Billy 1 battle swarms, while losing less than 50,000 men. And in the exact same moment that last Billy 1 position fell, our sensors picked up a comm signal from the Mind itself, and our diplomats began something that they now consider to be the weirdest peace negotiations in entire human history. The Mind accepted its defeat and our terms. It would withdraw its forces from both Yadrani and Katanab. Only thing is, its forces are already dead, but there are still billions of regular drones there, and while they are not armed, they are just as ravenous as their warriors. But when we tried to get the Mind to get its warp drones away too, it simply called them insignificant and ended transmission. And, as far as we can tell, it simply disconnected itself from these billions of drones. So, in the end we've won, but the victory isn't exactly what we hoped for. Without the Mind to guide them, the regular drones became obsessed with their endless hunger and began attacking everything in sight, and since we cannot reason with them, we'll have to spend months, maybe even years, trying to exterminate them. As for the Yadrans, some of them were grateful for our help, especially the Yuvanok servants, but the overwhelming majority either feared or resented us, and mere days after our victory, we received news about Yadran resistance cells attacking our soldiers. But we've won. We still have a lot of work ahead of us, and for now this victory may feel hollow, but it is a victory nonetheless. Once more, Commonwealth proved that its ingenuity and determination can see us through no matter the odds. But the question still remains, was it worth it? Oi, Andre, if you want to drink on duty you might want to do it a bit less conspicuously. You know Chief hates it when we get hammered during work hours. Well, Hiroshi, today Chief can just shove his issues up his arse. After that last assignment, the least I deserve is a bit of strong drink. Believe me, even if I chugged this bottle in one go, it would not be enough after all I've seen during these last few days. Yeah, you were in the section that dismantled those black sites. Haven't heard much about it, but what I picked up sounds pretty fucked up. That about sums it up. Remember those butcheries where Zrakan processed the now extinct lizards? I do, but I wish I didn't. I still see them some nights, around 3 in the morning. Same here, but here it was even worse. Back there, you at least knew what to expect, with bodies and blood everywhere, and with those industrial eviscerators that looked like something out of a horror movie. I mean, sure, it was fucked up too, but here it was just downright crazy. After we saw these disgusting, squalid hovels where Mind's drones live, that black site looked like it was something made by a completely different race. It was pristine, like that gene clinic back home. Clean, still walls, not a drop of blood anywhere. Hell, not even a microscopic scrap of genetic material. Just 20 square kilometers of vats. Rows and rows of vats, each filled to the brim with Yadrans of both races. At least with Zrakon you could feel their malice behind their actions, but here it was just this pure, clinical, industrialized process of death. Living, breathing beings come in from one side, blocks of orange nutrient paste come out of the other. When you see things like that, you want to believe that it was conceived by some diabolical mind, because it's simply too horrifying to accept the truth. And the truth is that there was no ill intent here, for all we can tell. The mind, whatever it is, it doesn't treat us Yadrans or even its own drones like living beings, but like yet another source of calories. But while it doesn't care, it's not so easy for the rest of us to come back from what we saw. I hear you, mate. Screw it, pass me that bottle. Saw some messed up shit on my own assignment as well. Piss off, you were on the Liberation team. While I had to deal with that nightmare fuel factory, you were probably showered with local flowers and swooning dragon ladies or something. So I thought. Same as you thought that most of the Yadrans have been abducted into Mind's territory, not processed on site. But anyway, this was nothing like getting the Aramathi out of the camps. Back there they saw us as liberators, freeing them from decades of slavery. But there was no slavery here. The Mind simply kept them in these walled-off pens and ignored them until it was their turn to be processed. And it turns out the Mind doesn't know the idea of livestock. In short, they don't give food to other food. Oh, fuck me. How many? Billions. Will be years before we have any solid estimate, but the biggest problem is actually with those who managed to survive, since you may guess where they found food to sustain themselves. And the worst part? From what we've managed to gather, the Uvanuks who lived on this world have volunteered to be the first ones to go to sustain their Katheman masters. By now they are mostly gone from this planet, but even that was not enough. So the guys you've been freeing are both starving and messed up from cannibalizing their own people. Okay, here's the bottle. Think we're gonna need a few more of those to pull through this. Per day, but that's not the end of story. When we landed on New Sajar, the Aramathi knew we're coming to set them free, but here most of these dragons saw a human for the first time, and thanks to their bastard of a king, they all think we're some sort of demons from the depths of hell that arrived here to bring chaos and ruin to their society. Hell, some of them don't even accept the food rations we try to give them, claiming that we're trying to poison or mind control them. The fight itself might have been easier, sure, but we're in for several rough years before we get this place up and running again. But hey, at least it's over. Is it? The Mind is still out there, and for all we can tell, it's winning in the north. And their core worlds are still untouched. We just kicked them from their new feasting grounds. Well, then we can at least hope they will have to eat each other back home. But I suppose you're right. I doubt we've seen the last of them. Oh shit, Chief's here. At ease, people. Hiroshi, I saw that bottle a mile away. Give it here. Don't give me the look, give it here. I need a drink. I have another job to do. Commander of Scouts called in a few minutes ago. They found a Billion hatchery and are securing it as we speak. They're gonna need us technicians to make sense of the place once they're done. Do we know what to expect there? Not really, but the commander wasn't exactly a reliable source during our talk. Man looked like he was fit to drop, and he seemed to barely contain the urge to puke all over the place after all he saw. But we know we're gonna need medical personnel on this one. Seems that there are a lot of live but heavily mutilated Yadrans there. It seems that the Mind tried to figure out if it can breed more of its drones using Yadran females. It can't, but it didn't stop them from trying.